All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here with John Herdering. Hey, John.
Morning.
Morning. And he is the Escalation Appraisal Review Manager at Citizens Bank. So he's going to talk to us about appraisals, the state of appraisals, and maybe give us some tips on what to do if an appraisal comes in low. So I appreciate you being on, John. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I think let's just do a brief overview of how appraisals are calculated or how do they come to the value? Just briefly.
Okay, there's three approaches to value when creating an appraisal. There's the sales comparison approach, the income approach, and the cost approach.
Okay.
For residential lending, the sales comparison approach is really the primary driver. What that tells the investor is what the property should sell for in a typical market environment when it's exposed to the market. So as an appraiser, what you'll do is you'll look at the property as a typical buyer would, right?
Okay.
So you're not going to take into account the personal effects that are there. You're going to look at it as if I was buying this house, how would this house compare to competitive alternatives that are available to me on the market?
But they're usually only using sold comparables, right? Or pending comparables. They don't generally use active ones.
Correct. So the properties that are already sold are what give you the basis for developing your opinion of value.
Okay.
You will look at actives or pendings that are on the market because they give you an indication of where the market is and where there's probably a ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the problem with utilizing actives or pendings are nobody has agreed to a price yet. So there isn't an actual value set on those.
I was just thinking more in terms too of as market shifts, right? So like sometimes the market shifts up and sometimes it shifts down. I mean, and we're like in one of those now. We think we are. We don't really know, right? So like everybody thinks we are. So then if we're shifting, I don't know, it's weird. It's like the prices are still high. So they are generally like higher than the ones that maybe have sold like a year ago or whatever.
So ideally, you would want to use sales that are as close as possible to the effective date, right? Which is the date you actually viewed the property.
Okay.
Sometimes if you have a unique property or you're in an area where there just hasn't been a lot of activity, you might have to use older sales to find something that is truly comparable.
That makes sense, right? Okay.
So ideally, you would use things that are as close as possible and most recent so that you're getting a good idea of what is occurring in the market right now.
That makes sense. And that's how we pull for the value when we list it too, usually.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because you're doing a very similar activity when you're trying to determine what to list it for, in that you're looking at what have things sold for and what is my current competition and what would I be up against.
Right.
So we're doing the same thing as appraisers. We're looking at these are the sales that are most recent. These were the most competitive alternatives to the subject that have sold recently. And then we're going to adjust based on how they differ from the subject property. So your big things that you're going to make adjustments on are the gross living area.
Right.
You're going to look at bathroom utility. You're going to look at amenities as far as outdoor decks, patios. Pools are more important in some markets than others. Garages have more value in some areas than others. Even within Cincinnati, you'll see a big difference in garage value someplace like downtown or Mount Adams than you will someplace like Mason or Westchester, right?
True, right.
So you'll look at those types of things. You'll also look at quality and condition. So Fannie Mae has some very specific definitions and quality and condition buckets or brackets.
Right. Like even a completely renovated home could never be in the same classification as like a new home, even though it's like basically new.
Correct. So when you see an appraisal, if you see a condition that's a C1, that means that nobody has ever lived in it. It's a brand new home. These are it's the first buyers. When you get to something that's been gut renovated, they took it back to the walls
like the
or the
studs.
studs.
Yeah.
Yes. So they updated electric, they updated plumbing, all new flooring. all that stuff, that would be considered a C2.
But then you can calculate based on those renovations. How much leeway do they have in adding? Because if you're taking something, like if you're in a neighborhood, and I talked about this with another agent that I had on how he's been able to effectively help appraisals become higher. We were talking about, so if you have like a 90s neighborhood and like pretty much everything sells for like, let's say 195, but it all needs renovation. And then you have the same house, but it's been down to the studs and renovated, and that cost $80,000, right? I mean, to go or something like that. The appraiser is not going to add 80,000.
No.
Right.
No.
So like, how do they determine? But let's say the house is listed for 215. They're not also going to come back at like 195.
So in that situation, using your hypothetical numbers there, so if 195 is what a normal home would sell for that hasn't been renovated, and a home that has been renovated will sell for 215, let's say.
Yeah.
Those renovations, the market has assigned a value to those renovations of $20,000.
Okay.
So that was the difference between what an unrenovated home and a renovated home sold for.
But let's say that's like the first renovated one.
Well, that person is kind of they're setting a mark at that point, right?
I think so, yeah.
So, they agreed to the price, and so that's giving the appraiser some type of matched pair to go against.
Right.
That's really how an appraiser determines an adjustment. You do what's called a matched pair analysis.
Okay.
So you look at the home that sold that wasn't renovated, the home that sold that was renovated. If they're all the same,
yeah,
everything is the same. It's a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath house with a rec room in the basement and a deck. And I've got this other one that's the same. And the only difference are those renovations.
Yeah.
And that tells me that the market will pay $20,000 for those renovations.
Okay. Got it.
And that's how you make that adjustment. So it does get a little bit murky at times.
I know, I can see that. It would be a lot easier, like when the market, like maybe back in like 13, 14, and 15, when the market was like, at least here in Cincinnati, was really stabilized. It would be a lot easier, but like when it gets a little bit off, it would be really difficult, I think, to do an appraisal.
Yes, it can be coming up with those match pairs sometimes can be a challenge in developing those adjustments.
Yeah.
Just because you don't always have two homes that are exactly the same except for one feature that's different, right?
Well, and plus you don't know if the other one smelled like cat pee versus this one that doesn't, or whatever, too. That makes a huge difference. I always say I think the listing should be like scratch and sniff, so you could tell, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm probably glad they're not.
Yeah, definitely on some of them.
But yeah, that definitely does come into play, and
okay.
The other thing an appraiser can do is if they're having, interviewing agents is a great way to get data, right? So if an appraiser puts out a call on something that you had listed, it's usually because they're trying to determine how to compare it to something else.
Right.
And they want some more information on you because they couldn't figure something out from the public data or MLS.
And this is where we need to, and we didn't cover this in the last one that I did, but like as agents, we need to answer the phone and like help these guys out, help these people out. I think.
Yeah, because if an appraiser is reaching out to you, they're reaching out to you because they can't find the data themselves.
Right.
They have some questions that you would be able to add color to, and it might be something as simple as I took this listing. It was the person was moving to another city.
Mm-hmm.
They were motivated to move.
Right.
They had or a situation where maybe it was an estate deal and the parties in the estate were disagreeing on what the home was worth, and it sat on the market longer because they wouldn't accept offers,
Right.
So, but those types of things that when an appraiser looks and says, okay, well, this one was on the market for 180 days, everything else is selling for 90. Why was this on the market for 180?
Do you think that as agents, if we're doing, like when we go to list a property and we see some of those discrepancies, would it be helpful to create like a little package for the appraiser to maybe explain some of those things? Or should we wait until to see if the value comes in or not?
So the more data you can give an appraiser, the better.
Okay.
Right? So the big things is, when you're dealing with appraisers, obviously you can't talk about the value itself or what, but
Well, they have the contract, so that technically is the value, right? Like what the buyers and sellers agree to.
that is, they do have the contract. And the reason that appraisers need to see a contract is, as an appraiser, you're looking for the items within the contract that aren't relevant to the real estate, right?
Oh, right.
So if you included, if there was extra money for
Closing
TVs
costs or, yeah,
or
personal
closing
stuff.
costs,
Uh-huh.
seller paid concessions that came in, other things that people don't always consider as personal property, like above ground pools, which are, they're not a part of the real estate.
No.
So if a value is assigned to that, that's something that you want to see in that contract. Or you'll see a lot on the coast and in beach areas, you might see where furniture is included, right?
Yeah.
So those are the type of things that the appraiser needs to know about, because that's not relevant to the real estate itself.
Right. Yes. And
Um,
their job is to assign the value so that the bank can see if they're having, like, if it's a good loan or not for the value of the property in case they have to take it back, right? Is that the
correct. We want to know
okay.
what the market value of the real estate is at
Mm-hmm.
that specific point in time to a typical buyer.
Right. Okay.
And that's really what we're most interested in, that market value, to make sure that we're mitigating our own risk, but we're also mitigating the risk to our borrower, right? We don't want our
Right.
borrower to be upside down in a hole.
What is the, as you experience market shifts, what kind of guidance or help are you giving to the appraisers to help make sure that they stay in actual value or future value versus, because they're looking
So
at
we
past data, you know?
correct. So an appraisal value is an opinion for a specific date.
Okay.
Okay, so you're not forecasting, you're not
So you
speculating, you're
just
not
don't
looking
worry.
forward.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, because none of us really know. And I mean, right now that's a big challenge, right? We have no
Right.
idea what this pandemic is going to do to markets, and every market in the country is
Nobody
going to react
knows.
differently. Yeah,
Right.
nobody knows. So we don't want to be predictive. We want to say what is going on today.
Today. But
And
see,
the
but
way
today it is some, I don't know, let's talk through this for a second. So like today in Cincinnati market, a ton of people had pulled their homes off the market, but the problem was is we were already in, like we already didn't have enough inventory for the buyers. So the prices have actually gone up a little bit. So if you look at the data, the houses should not be selling for what they're selling for, and yet they are.
So that's always a challenge when you're appraising.
I
When you
imagine it
have
is.
markets that are increasing, because
Right.
you are gonna place that on historic data, and you really do have to have something sold to show that.
Right.
And that's so sometimes it takes somebody paying or putting a little bit more down or paying cash for something to really show that the market's accepting
Or
it, right?
maybe I'm wondering like information from the agent on, hey, we were only on the market for, a lot of these houses are on the market for 1 day, right? We were on the market for
Mm-hmm.
1 day. We got 25 showings. We got 6 offers. All the offers were within this range. Like having that data, I would think would be helpful too.
Yeah, you can definitely submit that to an appraiser, and they'll
Uh-huh.
take that into consideration, right?
Okay.
And even if there's other things that have closed, right? That
Okay. That
you
maybe
want to
weren't on the market, like stuff off, because that's a thing too. A lot of stuff is closing off market.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a for sale by owner, and you can say, hey, this never got listed through MLS. Here's this address. You can verify in the county that it closed and what it closed for. Here's a contact person who can give you information about this property.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a big challenge for appraisers when it comes to for sale by owner, is you're limited on the data, right?
Right.
Because if it's through MLS, realtors do such a good job now of describing the property and providing,
Mm-hmm.
20, 30 photos.
Right.
You have a really good idea of what the property looks like and how it compares to your
Mm-hmm.
subject. When you're talking about a for sale by owner, unless somebody listed it themselves and posted photos, you really need to interview someone to find out about that property, right?
Right.
And that's a big challenge. So if there are those, that's a huge help if you can say, hey, I know of a couple properties that sold in the market. They sold for sale by owner. Here's the people you can call to get information about the property.
Mm-hmm.
And the appraiser's still going to do their due diligence, right? They're going to
Sure.
verify the sale
Of
through the
course.
county,
Right.
and they're gonna have to do that interview to get data, and then they can make adjustments from there. But it doesn't hurt if you're in a market with limited data and you know of those things.
Luckily, the counties opened back up because they weren't, and the recordings couldn't be done.
Yeah, Ohio was a lot better on that than a lot of places around the country recently.
Yeah. I mean, I think we covered a lot of stuff. I think in general, what you're saying is like more information is better than less. And then the appraiser will choose like what information actually like is relevant, because sometimes as agents, when people buy a house, it's really based in emotion, but the appraiser can't necessarily like use the emotional impact
Correct.
of the house. But let me ask you, I did have another question, actually, two more. Okay, so if you're adjusting for value, so we said the C1, right, is the new homes.
Mm-hmm.
C2 is like basically everything except for the C3 is like the really terrible ones.
No. It goes all the way to C6.
6. Okay.
Yeah. So C1 is, brand new. C2 is completely renovated.
Okay.
Like new.
Okay.
C3 is a home that has been renovated. So if you wanted to, you have new, let's say excellent, C3 would be good.
Okay.
C4 would be like an average condition. So there might be some cosmetic updates needed, but mechanically the home is sound and it's still functional. C5 you could say would be like a fair condition.
Okay.
So the house needs some kind of updating to really be livable. And it's maybe has some mechanical issues or it's just very dated.
Mm-hmm.
C6 would be a home that's uninhabitable, right?
Okay.
So it would
But
need
by mechanical, I know a roof is not mechanical and roofs are excluded, correct? Unless it's
roofs
leaking.
would be taken into, you'd look at that. I mean, if it's got a roof leak or something, that might push it into a C4, C5 category, just because that's a structural issue. The more water intrusion you have, the more future problems you have.
What if it's just like an old one versus one that's brand new? Does that make any difference?
That would get into, the appraisers have to make that determination as to where that fits in that scale.
Okay.
And you can even have, you could have a home that the entire interior has been renovated and it's got one item that maybe you would classify it as a C3, but it's on the lower end of the C3. So you could make adjustments even within a range.
Got it.
When
they make their adjustments, can they put any number on there? Like, can they put like 12,000 or 18,000 or whatever? Or is it like 5, 10, 15?
No, they can. I mean, again, ideally you're going to try and match it up with other sales in the market, and you'll base your adjustments off of that.
Okay.
But no, there's no rote adjustments, right? There's no like for a half bath, I always adjust this, or for this condition variance, I always adjust this. It should be based on the market.
Okay. So if, let's say, an appraisal came in low, and the buyer and the seller want to fight it to make the value higher. If, let's say, obviously, like, if it's the square footage, if they were incorrect in the report, that's easy. But let's say the report is actually correct, like the adjustments for the bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, whatever is correct. The only like kind of discrepancies are the classifications, like this, maybe they said it was a C2 house comparable, but we think it's a C3 or 4, or like, what are some of the things that have the biggest impact or that we should look at as agents?
So accuracy is one, right? So if there's a disagreement on the gross living area of the property,
right.
A big one that people disagree with that is not always relevant is the county might have your GLA, let's say, at 2,800, and the appraiser might come back and say that it's 2,400.
Okay.
But you have a 2-story family room, and the county counted that second level as living space, and it's not, because it's an open area, right?
Not yet. So, maybe one day, but not today.
Yeah. So if that 20 by 20 room, you take that out, that's your delta, and that's the difference there. So when you have material differences like that, you can always present them back to the
But that's
lender.
easy. I'm
That's
talking about
easy
the
ones.
not easy stuff.
The non-easy ones. Okay, so kind of what we talked about before, right? If you know there's market data available that the appraiser didn't use. So, hey, I know this home over here sold and it's a very competitive home. These buyers were looking at that home also.
Got it.
And it sold, it closed, but it's not on the report.
Okay.
So those are the type of things that you can present those to the lender. Lenders have, we have review departments. We'll look at that. And if it's a relevant comp or a relevant sale that we think may be comparable, we'll send that to the appraiser.
Okay.
And appraisers are not required to utilize sales that are provided to them, but they are required to analyze them. So what will happen in those situations is those sales will get presented to the appraiser. They'll look at them and they need to tell us why, if they're not relevant, why they're not relevant, and give us specific feedback that we can then give to our borrowers as to why.
Yeah, because your customer is the
use.
borrower. And if the borrower is asking something, I would assume you guys want to you want to help them, but it also has to have the due diligence for the bank. So your customer is really the bank and the customer, right?
Well, our customers as a lender are the borrowers.
Is the borrowers, right?
And we want to make sure that, again, that the collateral mitigates the risk for us and for them, right? So, but if a borrower has relevant data that we can present to an appraiser, we're going to present it to the appraiser and let them come back to us, because the appraisers are the market experts for the different geographies, right? When you're at a national lender, we're seeing appraisals from all over the country. So we rely on those appraisers in those individual markets as the experts.
That actually brings me to my next question. Are the person who's chosen to do the appraisal for a specific property, is that strategic, or because I've had some where this appraiser they don't know this area. Like they're pulling weird stuff. Because sometimes areas are street by street, but it's the same area and it's literally the next street over and it's completely different.
So under USPAP, appraisers are supposed to be geocompetent to an area. And if they're not competent for an area, for them to complete an assignment, they need to do what is necessary to become competent. And they need to include in the report what they did to get that competency. As far as assignment goes, depending on the lender, some lenders have dedicated panels. Some lenders use appraisal management companies. Your federal regulations and interagency guidelines are specific about how you go about assigning appraisals. So anybody with a financial interest can't impact how it's assigned, right?
Right.
So there is some randomization there. If you're using an appraisal management company, you'll randomize which management company it goes to, and then they utilize their panels to get it fulfilled and assigned.
Okay, makes sense. Based on, I assume, what the appraiser says the geos that they're competent in. I imagine there's some type of matching system. Okay.
Correct. And there's the appraisal management software that they have, and the platforms are pretty. You can pull up an appraiser and they'll pull up a map and show you how many they've done in different areas. And
cool.
The appraisal management companies, really monitor their quality and if they have any issues. So it's a pretty robust system that they have when they go through the assignment.
Awesome. Well, this has been really, really informative. I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything final that we missed that you think would be important that you want to add? I feel like we covered a lot.
I do too. No, it's I think you hit the high points on what what agents can really do to help out. And again, it's all about the available data and making that as easy as possible for. I guess the only other thing, if you really want to make it easier, when you do have those one-day listings, that go on and go off, if the MLS sheet has all of the information, that will only help your next client, because the appraiser can use it, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing more frustrating for an appraiser that when something is a perfect comparable and you open up the MLS sheet and it's completely blank.
Blank. There's
Yeah, it
nothing
doesn't
more
have a
frustrating
photo.
for an agent to have to fill all that crap out when it's sold.
I know, but it's so helpful for. So, that'd be one thing I would say that, when you have those, and I know you love those, that you got it sold before you even really get the chance
Right.
to fill out the listing.
Right.
But getting that data available where an appraiser can actually utilize it is such a huge help, and it saves them from having to call and bother you about it.
Well, we'll definitely take it under advisement, John. I'm just kidding. I really appreciate you being on. Thanks again.
Absolutely glad to be here, Jen. Thank you.
Bye.